everyone, welcome to From Nowhere to Nothing, Ontological Oxymorons. I'm your host, Joel Bouchard, a graduate student in education at Liberty University. And with me is Mr. Norman Gayford, a professor of English and philosophy at Genesee Community College. Speaking of Norm, here's something you don't know. I don't have Norm's phone number. I also don't have his address, and I really only see him incidentally outside of recording. So how do we coordinate these podcasts? The answer is social media. If we brought time travelers from only 30 years in the past to the present day, there'd be several things about the production of this podcast that would be completely novel to them, including the idea of a podcast itself. But perhaps no other concept would be as singularly shocking as the all-encompassing nature of social media in everyday life. All right, so we're going to kind of wrap up an unintentional series that we did that has been focused around sociological topics. You know, we started with politics, and then we got into economics and, civility.
Yeah.
And social media is going to kind of be the capstone to that, which seems a little bit like a strange choice because the other topics seem to have some gravitas to them. Politics, economics, civility. These are things that are very important. And, you know, I think a lot of people offhand would think, well, social media seems like sort of a frivolous topic to cover. Mm-hmm. And yeah, I think that especially over the past 10 or 15 years, it's definitely become a not so frivolous topic. But it's going to be something that's really different from anything that we've covered before, because you and I, up until this point, have really only covered classical topics of philosophy. Yes. You know, we've stuck to very much foundational things. And we're not by any means leaving them behind. You know, next week we'll probably start a new topic and maybe even a new series of topics. I've got a couple things rolling around in my head.
Cool.
But you know, I think it's good to stretch the legs a little bit and see, you know, what happens when we apply some of our philosophical brain power to a more modern topic like social media.
Which is more abstruse because of I just know we're going to get into this because of your studies, your education, grad work, and the technological things you're doing there. And my experience with it's abstruse because there's virtually endless permutations of social media, neither one of us is going to be absolutely anywhere near master of.
Right. And that's something about it that's real interesting is even the way that you use a certain social media platform can differ quite significantly. Like you mentioned the class, you know, my studies and really the class that I just took was the most focused on social media of any class I've taken. It was digital technology. And part of the course requirements were to develop a PLN, a personal learning network, which was essentially a Twitter social network. You had to follow experts in the field and follow your classmates and read their tweets and contribute to conversations. Well, they're not conversations. It's more like micro-blogging because
right.
You're so limited in characters and stuff. But you can share links and stuff. And it's funny because in that context, the use of Twitter was very professional and very, well laid out. Whereas, to quote my brother, Twitter, you know, in casual use is a hellscape.
I like your brother's quote.
Yeah, there's plenty of examples of that happening outside of an organized PLN, but that kind of highlights the variability of social networks, and really users are free to create the kind of experience they have based off of organizations and individuals they follow and choose to quote unquote friend. So it's a real big topic, and we'll be drawing on, you know, old episodes as well, but probably none more so than when we covered the self, you know, ages ago. You know, there's a lot of the self tied up in it.
There is.
But we'll jump in and we'll take it in the way that we've established our new template. But as we'll find out when we get to formative questions, it's not going to be as straightforward as the past couple topics we've done, because you get to formative questions, and whereas there's room for speculation with some of these other things, there's really there's a little bit, but there's not a whole lot of speculation as to how social media formed, because it formed within our lifetimes. So there's a very well-defined history, but there still are formative questions about why, not so much how or when, but why. Mm-hmm. So we'll get into it, but we'll start with the essence. So how would we define social media?
Well, if you look in dictionaries, I perused a few definitions, but first it seems locked on the word websites. Websites and applications that are used to generate content that is shared and shaped. Well, if you take the word website out and you substitute a different word for applications, and I think in a very real sense, and you and I talked about this off mic last week, I think, or the week before, social media, there's no such thing as media that isn't. And that goes back to the very beginnings of whatever media in the history of the planet that you want to go to, because when you create something, a piece of art, if it's for yourself, you're still engaging it in the kind of strange social mini loop. But for the most part, things are created for other people to interact with. Newspapers, hieroglyphics, the ancient Egyptian lists of beer and whatever,
right?
And the stones. So I'm not trying to conflate it all, but it's we think it's such a new thing because it's really just new tools that are enabling a vast, as you say, build it yourself and modify it and create it seemingly. And yet there's still an imperialistic, corporate, capitalistic driver that's giving us these tools, so to speak. And we say, oh, well, we can do anything we want with them. Well,
right.
Not necessarily.
Yeah, so that's the one thing. When I started out sort of doing some research for it and thinking about it, the thing that popped up to me is the question, can you have media without it being social? And then the inverse question, which is, can you have social interaction without media? And those types of back and forth questions really followed me all the way through the topic, wherever I went, these sort of defining terms. And the answer to them really puts in perspective what your view on the whole topic is. Mm-hmm. So let's say, if we're defining it, there's two words, social and media. Yeah. And I think you just sort of gave us our opinion that there really is no media that isn't social.
But there is social activity that doesn't necessarily involve media.
Yeah, so let's look at that word then, media, because I'm not so sure I agree with you just yet.
Well, that's good.
Media. So when I looked up media, it said that it's a media is something that serves as a buffer. The word media essentially comes from Latin, meaning middle ground.
Right.
And that's a good description.
Yes.
Something between people that serves as a middle ground. So there's something to say.
A bridge, a conduit.
Right. Yeah. So where do we draw the line on what media is? Because what you and I are doing right now, outside of the recording, just the conversation that we're having, we could look at it as, I have ideas that are happening, you have ideas that are happening, and our communication is the media. Because you have an idea about something, you expressed it, I'm not agreeing with it, so I'm going to make my argument as I'm doing right now. You're going to consider that, and then you're going to come back with a counter position. So could a conversation be considered media? Where do we draw the line on media?
Well, if we go back to I think, given the way you just said that, I think, because language is a medium. We've had this discussion about language. Well, we could not communicate without some kind of language. Now, in some contexts in your life, I'm sure you, perhaps in the military, you communicate a lot with eyes, but then you use fingers or gestures, and we have American Sign Language and so on and so on. So, I think I think those are various mediums in the largest sense.
So, and I'm not sure if I believe this position yet, but I'm going to put it out there just so that we can bat it back and forth and decide whether or not it has any merit. But I'm going to posit the position then that there is no social activity outside of media because we're not mind readers. You don't have the ability to telepathically understand my ideas. So as a result, we need a media in order to convey or have social interaction.
Okay, all right. So let's suppose that we're going to go way off this. So I live in a city, or Warsaw, whatever, and I go to the park. And there are other people there, and I look at the dogs playing, and I hear children laughing, and I'm enjoying walking around. And suppose that I never actually get close enough to anyone to actually say good morning or hello, or it's just. But we're all in the same space. So is the park a medium? Is it social because people are all in relatively the same space?
This sort of comes back to our cooperation and collaboration idea a little bit. Those things are very similar, but not the same, I don't think. So you have a park, and a park is meant to be a place where groups of people can have activities, but the very idea of a park doesn't necessitate people doing things together. So
you're doing things in parallel, or you happen to be doing things
right
within the space, but they don't have to intersect.
Right. So a park would not be necessarily a media.
Okay, so it's not a medium. Good. All right.
So something that is specifically created for social interaction doesn't necessarily mean it's a media. So we've established that. But let's say, so if something does require human interaction, is that necessitated by it being a media? So let's say language, okay. Language of any kind. Is language a media just because it does human communication, or does it have to be poetry or music, or does it have to be something else?
Language is a medium if there is interaction. I mean, language. This is okay. Here we go. Language exists. If I don't use it, then it is not an active medium for that moment, whatever it is. If I wish to talk to you, then I'm engaging language and therefore using them. This is almost one of those Zen questions. A bridge exists. Perhaps there's a bridge on a side street that no one drives over all day long. So the bridge is not in use. Perhaps no one even walks over it on a certain day. But it's still a bridge.
Right.
Because it's connecting two things, but it's connecting two places or two parts that no one happens to be walking in. Twitter exists. I wish it didn't, and your brother's right. It exists, and this is, you'll pull me back, but this is going sideways a little bit. But if medium, all media, plural, do not serve equally well for all kinds of interactions. I think that's the mess that we are in right now because it's still relatively new. So you wouldn't use a bridge to talk to somebody across a small gap of a river if you could shout to them. You would only use the bridge if you wanted to walk close and have a more intimate conversation. You would choose to use the bridge for a certain purpose.
Right. Okay. So I think we're starting to get somewhere. So if we were to look at social media and the essence of it and the definition of it, social is pretty self-evident. It has to do with interpersonal interaction. And And media, by the sounds of it, that's something that connects those people. So it can be a number of things. It can be pictures, whether or not it's, the Mona Lisa painted by Da Vinci, or whether or not it's a picture taken on Instagram. Or it could be, the Declaration of Independence, or a Facebook, text post, or it could be a conversation in person to person, or, an audio recording. But the media is the conduit for ideas to flow from one party to the other and to establish the middle ground.
Yes.
So that gives us social media. Like you said, every definition that I found online, it appears that at some point, probably, if I had to guess 3, 5, 7 years ago, something like that, there was a schism in the definition of media where media, there's a definition of media now that's solely dedicated to the idea of technology.
Yes. That is subsumed previous definitions.
Right. And I'm thinking that based off of social media, when you look up the definition, that they're using this definition of media within that word, rather than the definition we've been discussing so far.
So we can go to the electronic if you want.
Right.
Yeah.
So I don't think that in any way invalidates the definition that we just had. I think that if you are to look at just the etymology of the words social media, I think that our description is perfectly valid and acceptable. But for the purpose of our discussion, the version of media that most professionals are using does relate exclusively to technology. But all else tends to hold the same. So we have our definition of social media. So what elements constitute social media? And I think that probably the obvious one is relationships. There's social, there's relationships. And really outside of that, like we were just discussing, media can encompass any number of things. We can have visual, we can have textual, we can have audio, we can have a number of different things. Is there anything else that you think that constitutes social media outside of those kind of obvious things? Or do you think it's pretty much at face value?
I think it's pretty much at face value, but the face value needs to be questioned. The very word relationship. I think that if you want, you started very interestingly. I'm going to give you my phone number afterwards. It's crazy because I thought, yeah, we're always on chat, and that's. But if a conversation is a kind of relationship, small sets of characters thrown out against the face of the world, in anger or self-justificatory ways, there's an illusion of relationship. This is much like celebrity. Celebrities are human beings who have just as complicated lives as everyone else, but we think we know them because of the illusion of seeing them in roles or what they do. And so I think relationship really needs to be examined.
You've exactly hit at the heart of the issue, which I was hoping you were going to, which is that, if you were just to say, no, it's at face value and that's that, that would have been incorrect, because if you look at face-to-face relationships and you look at purely social media relationships that occur online, there is a vast difference between them. So if it were just to be at face value, oh no, it's just a social relationship conducted through media, then there wouldn't be any difference between the two. But there's a very obvious and distinct difference between the two. And so those are kind of the pieces that we're going to have to probe at in order to get to the really interesting bits of the conversation, and really the philosophical issues of the topic. And you've hit at the heart of it by talking about relationships. And I'm trying to decide if we'll save that for the speculative portion or if we should get into it now.
We can save it for speculative because
All right.
yeah,
because I think that will take. I think that's really the big issue, and it's probably the one that will take the most amount of time. So I don't want to run over now and then not have time to talk about some of the other stuff. So we'll move on to the formative aspects of social media. So why do you think social media, referring to technological media, why do you think social media exists? Why is it there?
Yeah, well, okay, so let's go from the most trite to downward, because I don't want to just give the trite answers. People want connection. We have established through economics and all the other topics that we've talked about the difficulty, seemingly, of human direct connection. And social media offers that possibility. It also offers, of course, from the physiological viewpoint, the endorphinal blast that you get because somebody, I guess, I don't know. This is a place that I don't go. I mean, I almost abandoned Facebook except for the chat. I'm coming back to it because of various reasons that we don't need to get into now. But I don't care whether somebody likes or doesn't like. Thumbs up or thumbs down. Who cares? I mean, if you and I were talking and all you did was go, oh, thumb, and then down. No, that's not going to go anywhere.
Right.
But there's that endorphinal. There is the connection. If somebody knows you are thinking about them, even if it's a short sentence. I'm doing this morning. How's your morning going? It's meant as a reach out. And so a text, which is a funny word because all writing is text, but
right.
but a text, so-called, allows that message in a bottle yet immediacy that gives the not just the illusion of a connection, but the intentionality of a connection. Whereas if you just blasted out a picture on Instagram, which I've done, I didn't even know people were going to follow it. I have like 5 or 6 people that I don't know. Used to once in a while put a photograph out and I'm thinking, oh, okay, that's nice. But why did I put that out there? Because I wanted people to see something that I saw, but I wasn't targeting anybody. It says, oh, isn't this interesting? Basically, is what you're saying with a photograph. And that's different than a text. So I'm going on here. You can stop me, but
yeah, no, I think that you brought up a couple of interesting things as examples, and the one that I like, the one that you were talking about, where if we were having this conversation with a thumbs up or thumbs down, it doesn't do anything, and we kind of demonstrated that early on. You said something about media, and I said I don't agree with you.
Yes.
And then I offered a counterpoint, and that's what's missing with some social media interaction. Is, in a way, I almost wonder if it would be better if there was no such thing as likes. If all you could do is comment.
Yes.
And I feel like that would have problems of its own, because I think that people tend to hide behind a
heart or a frown or a smile, any of the millions of emoticons
or even in
emojis.
Even when commenting, I think that they hide behind the veil of cybersecurity. For instance, let's say you and I had a violent disagreement here. Yeah. You said something about my mom, right? Like, I could.
She's a nice person.
I mean, could I storm out? Sure. But there would still be an actual tension.
Yes.
Whereas if you were to say something about my mom on social media, I could just unfriend you or, whatever. And then you cease to exist in my digital world. I've essentially killed you in my visual world.
What if it's canceled? You've canceled.
Right. And so, maybe that still lingers in my consciousness. But I think that a lot of psychology has shown that people are pretty good at separating virtual lives from their actual lives to a degree. And so I think that even if there was just commenting, I think there'd still be a bit of that. You see people on Twitter or in comments start, really going at it in arguments. And when you read these comments, what you realize is, like, if this was happening in a town square, it would never happen.
Right.
It would just never happen because, and I'm not sure if it's because there's it's the immediacy of it, having somebody face to face, or if it's other cues. I can see your facial expression, I can see your body language, right? I can tell by the tone of your voice something. I'm not sure why it is, but I think that even if there was just commenting, we would still have social media problems. But I feel like if we were to eliminate the entire liking system, it might still be a step in the right direction.
I think it might be, and what you just described about the town square kind of thing, there's no utopian medium. There isn't. There never has been. The town squares were pretty raucous and violent places 230 years ago, but the immediate, it's id-like. If we go to psychological terminology, and I know for some people Freud and Jung are old hat, but for me Jung still offers so much. The id is too often enabled by some of the social media. In the circumstances that you're describing, if I'm sitting in a nice cozy chamber and I'm mad at the flippin' world and I'm just going to blast something out there, I just do it because I don't even think about it. In the professional world, we have the recall of emails, which is really ridiculous too. It's as much like a judge saying to a jury, disregard that last comment. And you hope that intellectually and rationally jury members will, but the likelihood for human nature is, nope, I heard it, I'm incorporating that. Mm. Well, the same kind of thing. You send out an email you wish you had and you recalled it. At least you're saying a kind of oops.
Right.
But it's not an apology. Seldom do we see the social grease and the authentic vulnerability of apology in much of the social media in the technological terms. I'm going to say this. Why? Because I can. Why? Because I'm American. Because I'm free and I get to do this. I get to say anything that I want. But we don't have any filter on, yes, but does it have worth? Are you wanting a conversation or are you just putting up a billboard?
Right. And if somebody says something later that disproves it or makes you look stupid, you can just delete it. You don't have to apologize. You can just delete what you wrote.
Yeah.
Right. So the formative questions. Why is there social media? I think that we covered it a little bit and then we got a little bit off track.
Yeah,
but I think that
Sorry.
I think that there's several reasons for it. You started out with the most noble, and I think that it's true. And I think that most social networks are created with it in mind, which is people want to have connections. And I'm sure you and I have plenty of those connections. Yes. I have friends with people in Hungary or France or Japan. It's people that I couldn't be friends with any other way.
Absolutely.
But then, and this was kind of interesting when I was researching for the show, what sort of threw researchers off in the infancy of social media was that, after it'd been around for a couple of years and they'd gathered data, what they found is that people were using social media to communicate and connect with people that they already had a strong relationship with offline, their family, their close friends, these people. And so that raises a different question. So why would you engage on social media if you already are interacting with these people?
Well, one, there are endless reasons. And so but to stay with the formative, there's really no better way to share a photo album.
Right.
You want everybody to see the baby or the new house or whatever it happens to be. There it is. Everyone can access it. Or a trip that you went on. So just from the most practical, I wish I could have showed you the pictures. Well, now we can.
Yeah.
And you don't have to look at them or you can. So there's the practicality of sharing the evidentiary material of an experience. So that's one of the formative things.
Yeah, I think that's, and so, I think that's important to cover because there's very legitimate and very useful aspects to social media. I'm not, and I don't think that you are, the kind of person that automatically assigns an ethical property to technology just based on its existence.
No.
It's all the way that people use it.
It's not all bad or it's not all good.
Right. It's the way that it's employed by people.
Yeah.
So, and the dark side of that is pretty self-evident to everybody, which is that it's really grounded in psychology. except instead of, you brought up, Jung and Freud with id. I'd bring up behaviorism. It's more Skinner or
it's a Skinner, giant Skinner box.
Yes, a like, or a message is more a
it's an
ringing the bell. It's ringing the bell for Pavlov's
We salivate
dogs.
for more likes.
Right. And the fact is, people have developed empires based off of that. And I don't even know if I'm allowed to mention any names, but I'm sure that there's people out there that keep up with them on TV shows and whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
And, people who have made billions of dollars off of nothing more than having a presence. And
so this is one of the other formative things. Influence. To why social media? To influence.
Mm-hmm.
To get people to want something. Back to the advertisement stuff. To try to make people accept that you're right. The assertion of some kind of power.
Right, and that's what they call these people. They call them social media influencers. If you're at the top of the game, if you are royalty in social media, you are a social media influencer. And that kind of gets to, again, we're into perspective. So on an individual level, maybe you and I are using social media to stay in contact with people that we couldn't any other way, or coordinate events with people that we do know by, sharing events or creating things or whatnot. But there's another perspective to that, which is the people who control the social media. And those people are unabashedly trying to sell you things based off of your personal data and preferences. And influencers are kinds of tools of those sorts of people who are not in line with them. I don't think that they're in league. They may be to an extent, but I don't think they are necessarily. But they're pushing products from endorsers of their own. So it very quickly became a capitalist in a sort of system.
Yes, and then the other formative part is the educational, because of course education moves in and says, how can we use this to better reach or alternatively reach the people that we're trying to teach?
Yeah, and there's no overlooking that, because the history of social media is grounded in education and, of course, military research.
Yeah, what ARPANET, right?
Right.
So,
yes, ARPANET and university, college library systems and things started. Mm-hmm. That's where social media started. The ability to connect for users to have a shared internet experience. That was the beginning of social media. And, I think that although people don't necessarily associate, military or even higher education to a large degree with social media anymore, I think that it still is a big factor. And like I said, the class I just took was all about this sort of thing. And the book was written by a guy who took over a school district, and there was no online presence at all. And he had a very small school district in the middle of 3 larger cities. And his fear was that the school district was essentially going to fall into obscurity and be, incorporated under these other districts. So in order to avoid making that happen, he really put a lot of effort into studying the art, essentially, of social media and social technology, and reformed the school with all of the latest cutting edge things. And the school became very successful, and it has its own web page and social, Facebook page, and, its own blog, and, all these things. And there's things about that are very admirable. And some of the ones that come to mind are interactivity. So with having a school blog rather than, say, a newsletter allows for parental feedback. It allows for a conduit for parents to interact with administration and teachers immediately. which I think is good and bad, but I think in the long term, it's good because it's, you can say, hey, this is something that's happening. Whereas if you just send out a newsletter, you're just saying this is happening, and you're not really getting the feedback.
I won't keep going, but I want to talk about this. Yeah.
But some of the negative things I thought of were, he said specifically that it was very important to establish a school brand, because if you don't establish a brand, if you don't tell people what you're about, then people will weave their own story and put it out there, and it's not going to be what you like. And that really kind of rubbed me the wrong way a little bit. Because
yeah, sure.
I mean, is that true? Yes, I think if you passively go about your business, people will say things about you, and that's existed before technology. Oh, well, I heard from this person that you're doing this, or whatever the case may be. But I feel like it's always been sort of a virtuous thing to rise above that and kind of let your actions speak for themselves. Whereas the message behind this was, no, you need to proactively put out what your message is about so that people see it in writing before there's any actions. And I feel like there's something inauthentic about that. And that's part of the entire problem with social media.
It is. Two things. Because based on the educational formativeness, I have seen far too often recently wherein social media are not used to have the discussion, but are used to circumvent the democratic process, to collectively bully, for instance, on the parts of community members or parents who want to remove someone, or I don't like the way you're governing the system, and therefore I'm going to gather up all my friends. I'm going to tell them everything that I think that you're doing wrong, and we're then going to converge and drive you out. That's a really awful use, and it happens a lot, not just among kids, but among adults who think, okay, so it becomes a gangland, right, of a very real kind. The second thing is assumptions that are flawed deeply in education. For instance, in my institution, we recently received a message from on high that suggested that we have to keep up with all of the tools because we have to assert our relevance and maintain our sustainability, which means we're going to lose. We're all colleges right now are losing students. Mm-hmm. Okay, that happens. I've seen this cycle 3 times in my work as a teacher. This is nothing new, but the assertion that one has to always stay with the newest stuff in order to be relevant, to lock the term relevant with the term always brand new, is not educationally sound.
Right. Yeah, and I think that's something that educational institutions are really grappling with right now. Is I think that they're playing catch up, but while they're playing catch up, the pendulum is starting to swing the other way a little bit. I think that there was, in the first part of the 21st century here, educational institutions really resisted technological change. And so while students were coming to them with all kinds of knowledge of how to use the internet and how to use social media and how to use databases and stuff, schools were saying, well, here's a book. And there's nothing wrong with that, because we've been teaching out of books for the entire history of humankind, and we've continued to make progress.
And we can use books in conjunction.
Exactly, because, and that's the thing now that's why I say the pendulum is swinging the other way, is because now I think education is really trying to make the shift to technology, say, listen, we're relevant, we're on the cutting edge. Here's all of the technological tools. But rather than teaching teachers how to employ them or having any sort of plan on what the best use of them is, they're just saying, here they are, you have to use them, figure it out.
And it has been that way, and it continues to be that way. From my view as a teacher, there is some reach out from some contracted computer services that say, well, here are some new tools. Could we have some workshops and see what you think might be best? That happens occasionally. Generally not. Generally it's, well, whatever's cheapest, the institution is going to go for. But what gets the social media loses the social of the immediate in a classroom. There's a set of tools that are all bundled up in a thing called 360. I forget the exact name for it now, but we're going whole hog toward this. And so essentially you're standing in a command chamber in your classroom where you have 2 or 3 screens like unto some science fictional starship, right? And headsets or buds or the equivalent. Wherein any student who doesn't want to come to class or can't because they're on the other side of the planet, or they live 300 yards away from the college where they don't want to bother to walk up. I'm having a cozy day. I just want to. We will accommodate that so that I'm going to look like a Borg-like Star Trekian alien. And try somehow to still have a personal relationship with the students in the room at the same time that I'm monitoring cameras and audio.
Right. It's we're full on into the speculative now, which is good because it's that time to be there. But it's really a very stark example of good intentions having a sort of bad practical outcome. It's a noble intention to want to teach people all over the world and do all this stuff, but it's not something that is necessarily going to be for the good of all the students involved in the process.
Yes, the noble and the noble intention can often be reshaped into not by questions not being asked or heard, which would be, why do we, the school you talked about, here's a small school in a large, why does a college in an area that is soaked in colleges want to reach out to international students saying, we offer something that no one else does? Well, that's not really true. We don't offer something so vastly different. So it's a sell campaign. Well, but we're cheaper, or whatever any institution will use. So it's not that we're so unique that we offer something that, no, it's just that we will cost you less. Plus, look at all these gizmos that we can.
Yeah. There's a lot of mission creep, and there's a lot of economic viability slipping into higher education, which is a topic of its own. One of these times you and I should do education.
I hope we do.
But I have a feeling based on our background, it will be a 2 or 3 part episode. I don't think we could stop at an hour.
No, it will be.
But yeah, coming back to social media. Yeah. So we're talking about what social media should be and what it is. And, I think that when we look at some of the issues the philosophical issues in social media, one of the big ones that they're seeing psychosocially is this problem of social media causing mental disorders related to loneliness, which is sort of ironic and paradoxical to the mission or stated mission of social media platforms. Yes. So what do you think about that?
Well, I think we should have a rather rapid fire hit on a number of topics that might be related in our speculation, and cut loose.
Okay.
So I'm cutting loose. Any communication with another human being, I think, has the possibility of alleviating or exacerbating loneliness. It is entirely in the content of the message. But if social media, and we know that in some circumstances it does, encourages relationships in which people never, ever, ever have to actually meet to take, I don't want to use the capital, I was about to say take stock. I hate that. Never mind. No, to assess. No, to find out the messy, intuitive immediacy of interaction. How do I know you are who you say you are with nothing but communication back and forth? Am I suppose and this is social media dating, social media relationships. How do I know? And why do I just accept that you say that who you are when we know that there's so many people who will manipulate?
Yeah. And I feel like, again, I'm not so sure if even in real life it is an issue. I think that I sort of subscribe a little bit to the psychological theory that everybody's wearing different masks. And you really understand that if you have social media and you're friends with your parents, your best friends, your coworkers, all these things. All of a sudden you realize, oh, well, what can I say and what can I say, with all these different groups that I'm friends with. And I don't think that's any different in real life, but there
from a Thanksgiving table.
Right. But I feel like it's more potent because in real life, you have synchronous communication. You don't have time to sit back and think out what you're going to say, or really edit your photo, or really, edit your audio, or do any of these things. You're just there. So even if I'm trying to put on a mask with you that I wouldn't put on with somebody else, I still have much less time to prepare for that. And how you react to me seeing the kind of unformed version of what I put out there is much more telling and much more human than if I were to just type a post. And also, I think what goes along with that is something I said before, which was talking about how we have facial expressions, we have body language, we have all these things. All of these things are just as much a part of language as the words or the pictures.
They absolutely are. The kinesics of it are. But what you just described, nonetheless, hardly having time to put a mask on. This is what I assert is wrong with things like Twitter.
Right. You almost have the opposite problem. People putting out things without thinking about
thinking. And that's I abhor Twitter. It's certainly, and here's the thing. I have a list of perhaps almost moralistic shoulds and shouldn'ts. Twitter should never be used for governing. There's no thought. It's just quick blasts, no matter who it is.
Right.
Twitter is not a governing tool. It's a gossip mongering little swampland that brings out the worst in people. Not uniformly. People use Twitter to let people know things. I get that. But it's not primarily, it's not its use. There's some, we have to be able to say no, just like we would in human behavioral terms, to go back to Skinner or to just behaviorism in general. We wouldn't accept certain things in live conversation.
Yeah, I think a good way to look at that is like the workplace. So we all live in the United States, so we have freedom of speech. But what freedom of speech, what the First Amendment says is that you cannot be sent to jail for saying something or printing something or publishing something. But what that doesn't protect you from is in your workplace, you can't say whatever you want and expect not to be fired. Because the workplace is a private institution that has its own rules.
There's a culture
social
of the
media,
institution.
social media platforms also are private places that have their own rules. They have the ability to censor some of these I don't know
But they
how to say.
almost don't do it. Yeah.
They don't do it, and I think they don't do it for entertainment and revenue reasons. And a lot of people like to say, "Oh, well, then where do you draw the line? Like it's a slippery slope. Oh, now social media is Big Brother and stuff." And
that's the easiest. The false. That's bad logic, but people say it,
and that's why I bring up the workplace situation is because businesses run just fine having their own private rules, and nobody accuses them of being Big Brother. Nobody accuses because you come to accept the fact that you can't say racist things at the work environment and expect to have a job. You can't say these things and expect to continue.
Right.
So why is it that social media should allow those things and the workplace shouldn't?
We get all excoriated or exercised about the Chinese. Well, I was going through some of the 45 most popular social media tools, and a good chunk of those are from China. Why? Because it's the most populous place on the planet. But we might say, oh, well, look at what they're doing. They do facial recognition. So are we. But they can follow. Well, NSA. I mean, it's not like we have to be more grown up and say, no, there are certain things you can't do. Yes, I want a fact checker built into every tweet. I want a fact checker built into every post. I don't want it to be the so-called Wild West. It wasn't a very pretty thing, and there was a lot of destruction and doom there. I want the fact-checking to be there. Because I want people to realize, if I say something, somebody's going to check whether that's true or not, and they're going to it's going to be out there. That's what I want artificial intelligence to do.
Right. And, maybe at some point in the future it will get there. But I was reading in the Stanford University encyclopedia entry on social media. And that's one of the biggest philosophical questions regarding social media is, there's the privacy aspect, of course, and then there's, the representations of the self. But one of the things that they specifically bring up is the ability for parties to just say whatever they want and not have any sort of legitimacy to claims. Mm-hmm. And so that's something that I guess it was sort of shocking to me because you're a boomer and I'm a millennial. So I've always grown up with technology, right? And so here I am.
So am I millennial.
Right.
Just different technology.
Yeah. So I guess I was thinking about it and I was like, well, yeah, I guess before the internet, before social media, really, you couldn't receive, information from any source that wasn't vetted to some extent. And if it was an educational institution, obviously that's of a higher quality than, say, a newspaper or a magazine. But even newspapers or magazines had editors who had some sort of ethical, in some cases, some ethical or dignified. It was their job. It was their specific profession to.
Right. But they also had a bias. I mean, the Democrat and Chronicle, the Republican, whatever, all the newspapers' names showed that that's where the editorial angle was. But the work was still to present, even back to Ben Franklin, which was also hypocritical. Well, let's present. If we just present every viewpoint, the truth will out. Well, that was extraordinarily idealistic and representative of a very different time, but also completely hypocritical because here were people who were writing about being enslaved by a foreign government while they owned slaves and said nothing about it. And so, journalism is noble. It's also flawed, but it's absolutely vital. And because facts need to be checked, presented, and then rethought. But we aren't into that now. And this is I'm vehement about this because it is danger Will Robinson time. It is red alert. Social media is enabling, if not guiding, the destruction of the very idea of factuality. It is a hyper reality that Nick Bostrom and various post-modern philosophers have presented, which is essentially a cascade of varying realities, none of which has any particular interconnectivity.
Right. We have fake news and alternative facts and almost sort of a quantum foam of reality going on.
Choose your reality and live within it. That's what we're doing now, and I'm just to maintain the political neutrality. But that's what almost everyone is doing now.
Right. And you mentioned it when we were talking about the school technology in schools, how people use it to gang up and oust certain people and those sorts of things. And the research really supports that. It says that people tend to use social media in such a way as to strip people of their individuality and instead assign to them a group. So if somebody were to see me on social media, rather than seeing me as a person, they would tend to see me as a Republican or a gay or a whatever I was saying online. Whatever I said online, they would tend to see me as a member of a group as opposed to an individual. And I think that, coming back to the philosophical aspect of that, I think that some of that probably does stem from not being able to hear the tone of somebody's voice, not being able to see them. And I feel like a lot of that changes, because there's definitely been people that I've had those discussions with. And there's no bigger example of that than Trump getting elected. There's some people who I was friends with for a long time. And then once Trump was elected, you thought, wow, I never would have thought that person would have voted for him.
Right.
And the immediate inkling is to say, well, that person is not my friend now because they're supporting this abhorrent person, person who's abhorrent to me or whatever. But that is exactly the trap that you'd want to avoid with social media. Instead, what should be happening is you should be saying, okay, well, this person who I've been friends with for a long time, whose opinions I respect, who I think is reasonably intelligent, sees some kind of value here. What is it that they see? Yes. What is it that I'm missing? What is it that, what perspective are they looking at that I'm not seeing? And that's doing that is not automatically lending credence to their position.
Not
it's
at all.
Just doing your homework to figure out.
It's the due diligence of trying to understand your fellow human being.
Right.
That doesn't mean you abandon the notion, or more than a notion of looking at a whole array of behaviors and whatever and priorities, and say no. But this is not about trying to change your mind. This is not about trying to. It's about why.
Right.
And that doesn't mean I'm going to necessarily change my mind either. It's not about mind changing. But social media has helped us, has enabled us to be at a complete bifurcation, a binary, dual collectiveness that I think, as a layperson, would be textbook mental health issue.
Right.
On a national scale and on a planetary scale, because most cultures now are, it's not the voting and so on is within a hair's breadth of everything, of any particular topic, a hair's breadth of so 48% and 51% and 49% and 50, and it's, we're on there for with everything. We've not been that way before.
Mm-hmm.
And I have to, it's clear that social media is at least part of that.
Right. Yeah. And and it's unfortunate because I think under other circumstances, that would be a really beneficial thing for society to have it split so evenly. If you had it split that evenly and there was productive conversation happening,
yes.
people would be making the choices that were in the best interest of everybody involved. I feel like finding a compromise should be much easier than it would be at any other time.
and it has become much less.
Right.
So
I've literally seen this happen on social media where somebody has posted something, and rather than presenting a counter argument or hitting a like or a dislike button, I've seen somebody just comment, "Okay, boomer," or "Okay, snowflake," or whatever it is. How does that help anything? How does that? Where does that get us?
It doesn't get us anywhere, and I think that is where I won't go to the route of just blaming social media, because I don't think that was intentional. Whatever else I might say about Mark Zuckerberg, I don't think that he intended to create a schism of unimaginable proportions. I just don't think that was it. Or the other developers. It's something like James Bond villains.
Right.
But I think that social media and the way that it's used have led people to say, well, I don't want to help. I'm not interested in the conversation. I don't have to listen to anything you say because I've got all this stuff right here. This is my island. There's your island. Stay away from me.
Right.
If you're that way, don't talk to me. And that's ugly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's a big that's again one of the big philosophical topics in social media is the fear that the philosophers have of people forming echo chambers and essentially seeking out opinions that reinforce their own and then disregarding all others. And I think that that's outside of the realm of philosophy now. I think that's something that's empirically, psychologically measurable. Yeah, I think that's something that can be looked at.
Yeah.
But no, I agree with you. And to end on, I like to end on a little bit more of a positive
note. Of course, yeah.
Because it seems like in the past few episodes when we're dealing with people, it always goes someplace ugly. But no, I agree with you. I think that if you look back at the history of a lot of these social websites, and you see how they started, what you do realize is that there was a noble intent at the beginning to connect people. And, along the way, capitalist interests take place. And there's no way, Mark Zuckerberg was not a PhD in psychology. And even if he was at the time, I doubt that you would have been able to.
He was a kid saying, here's this, wow, we could do this.
Right. There's no way of predicting how society on a large level would react to such an advanced tool. But there definitely is positive things that are happening because of it. I know a teacher who taught third grade, and used these Web 2.0 tools. She had an online store that students could, they could earn points by doing well in class, and then they could use the points on to buy products that helped people in, I think, Rwanda to build wells for water. Yeah. And there was this third grade class that supplied clean water to an entire village and halfway across the world. Like you said, there's people that we keep in touch with across the world. We build bonds with people.
Yeah.
There's a lot of good things that are happening. The last class I just took, creating that personal learning network on Twitter. It's funny because it's almost an entirely different animal than it was before. All of a sudden, if you're not following the influencers, if you're following real people who are sharing relevant tools, it becomes something very powerful. And powerful in a way other than dividing and conquering, and other than doing these things.
It doesn't have to be that way.
Right.
And that's the positive part of it. I'm not, boomer, I'm a boomer and I'm getting older, but I can't be all doom and gloom because that's of no use to anybody from me on outward.
Right.
But it still requires to say, we need to think about this.
Yeah, and I think I'm optimistic that maybe there will be a place for AI in the future to regulate some of this. I don't think the Wild West will go on forever. I think
just a gentle nope, just a little floaty bubble. Nope.
Yeah. Because if anything, I think that what we've discovered is that the capitalistic interests are going to win out. Whatever makes the most money is going to succeed. But I see the potential for AI to even increase that, because these people that are currently dominating the platform with hateful or explosive, entertaining rhetoric. I feel like fact checking them adds another layer of entertainment and a positive layer to it. So I think that, if the technology gets there, I think that it will happen. And I think humankind will be better off for it. But we'll end there, and we'll pick up a new topic next week. So until next time, thanks for listening and keep pondering.